evening with world-renowned pioneer in integrative medicine, Deepak Chopra, moderated by businessman and owner of the Jacksonville Jaguars, Shad Khan. Wednesday, January 15th, 7 p.m. Tickets at thefloridaforum.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, there was a time when some law enforcement officials in Florida made and then sold crack cocaine, a practice the state Supreme Court said was illegal. We discuss a new effort by prosecutors to erase those convictions. Then a real-life horror story makes its national film debut. We talk to the local director of The Man in the White Van. And a tough weekend for the Jags against the Jets. News4Jax sportscaster Alessandra joins us to break down the breakdown. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First
News in Washington. I'm Corva Coleman. President-elect Trump's cabinet nominees are continuing to meet with senators on Capitol Hill. Trump continues to fully support his choice for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, a former Fox host. Hegseth has been accused of sexually assaulting a woman, of public intoxication, and of mishandling money when he ran a veterans organization. He has denied the allegations. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says Hegseth told him he will release the woman who accused him of sexual assault from a confidential settlement agreement.
There's one allegation in a police report about sexual assault. That person has the right to come forward to the committee. But about mismanagement of money, about having a drinking problem and saying inappropriate things, all of these are anonymous allegations. He's given me his side of the story. It makes sense to me. I believe him. Unless somebody's willing to come forward, I think he's going to get through.
He spoke to NBC's Meet the Press. South Korea's Constitutional Court is preparing to review the impeachment of the country's president, Yoon Song-yeol. NPR's Anthony Kuhn reports from Seoul. The South Korean parliament voted to impeach Yoon over the weekend because of his recent decision to impose martial law.
The court's justices' meeting is to discuss dates for hearings and procedures for reviewing evidence. They have 6 months to either uphold the impeachment, in which case Yoon will be removed from office, or overturn it, in which case he'll be reinstated as president. In 2017, the court took about 3 months to confirm the impeachment of then-President Park Geun-hye. Yoon is also being investigated on charges of insurrection. Prosecutors summoned Yoon for questioning last week, but he didn't comply. In a phone call with President Biden on Sunday, acting President Han Duck-soo reassured him that the U.S.-South Korea alliance will remain steadfast. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Seoul.
There are indications in Israel that a ceasefire and hostage deal with Hamas in Gaza could be close. But even as negotiations continue, Israeli forces continue to strike Gaza. Palestinian health officials there say the strikes have killed more than 150 people. NPR's Michelle Kellerman has more.
Skywriting planes drew huge ribbons in the skies above Tel Aviv, a reminder that Israelis are still waiting for the return of 100 hostages captured by Hamas over 14 months ago. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke to President-elect Donald Trump over the weekend about the efforts to get the hostages home. A source familiar with the negotiations tells NPR there is momentum. U.S. officials and analysts say Hamas is showing more flexibility, too. But Palestinians under bombardment remain skeptical, and some families of the hostages worry that the deal will only bring some of them home. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
On Wall Street in pre-market trading, stock futures are higher. This is NPR.
And you're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. A 55-year-old man is guilty of first-degree murder in the death of his wife, according to the state attorney's office. A Duval County judge found Jerry Burns guilty in the 2019 murder for hire of wife Velvet Burns and will seek the death penalty when they return this hour to begin the penalty phase. Prosecutors say that Jerry Burns worked with his mistress, Amanda Love, to hire someone to murder his wife. Love previously pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder in 2019 and was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Co-defendant Stephen Hand pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in 2022 and was sentenced to life. If you have a stutter, being in the workforce could be a little harder. Ailey Shanes reports that's according to a new study from the University of Florida.
The study found those who stutter have lower earnings, experience underemployment, and have lower job satisfaction. The UF College of Public Health and Health Professions analyzed over 2 decades of data from people who stutter. It found they are about 4 times less likely to earn $100,000 or more, and they're 25% less likely to be satisfied with their job. According to the American Speech-Language Hearing Association, more than 3 million people stutter in the U.S. Although there are no cures for stuttering, there are therapies available to help improve speech fluency. I'm Ailey Shanes in Gainesville.
This afternoon, highs will be in the lower 70s under partly sunny skies.
Comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lilly Endowment, a private foundation supporting NPR's coverage of religion and spirituality, and Jarl and Pamela Mohn, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, law enforcement policies during the crack epidemic have been the subject of much scrutiny and criticism. None more so than when some Florida deputies began manufacturing the drug to sell. We're discussing a new effort to erase those convictions. Later in the program, the local director of a Florida-grown horror story, now in theaters nationwide. But first, a South Florida prosecutor announced plans to dig through and reverse thousands of old crack convictions based on an illegal practice. To discuss that, we're joined by retired DEA agent Mark Baughman. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning.
And Jacksonville criminal defense attorney Shannon Schott. Good morning, Shannon.
Hey, good morning.
So, Shannon, I think a lot of people were surprised to hear about this policy of the Broward County Sheriff's Office back in the late 80s and 90s. Tell us a little bit about what they were doing.
Sure. It has come out through the efforts of Mr. Pryor's office that in 1988 to 1990, in around 1988, there was a find in a Greyhound station of a significant amount of cocaine. Normally, the sheriff's office would destroy anything that wasn't tied to an active investigation, but instead they decided to send it to the Broward County Sheriff's Crime Lab and manufacture crack cocaine. They then use that crack cocaine to go into predominantly low-income neighborhoods with mostly black and brown people and do reverse buys, which is when the officer is undercover and acts not as someone purchasing the drugs to catch the dealer, but as the dealer trying to catch people who are ultimately just addicted to crack cocaine.
And you say Mr. Pryor, that's the Broward County prosecutor, Howard Pryor. So he may or may not have known that this was happening. I mean, he's a much later tenured prosecutor down there, and this was happening obviously long before he was there.
Correct.
Under a former sheriff named Sheriff Nick Navarro. But the Florida Supreme Court at some point weighed in on this practice. Is that right?
They did. In 1993, in a case called State v. Williams, Florida Supreme Court said that this behavior from the law enforcement officers was outrageous and therefore a due process violation, and that people could not be charged with this crime moving forward. The problem is that ruling was not retroactive, meaning all of the people who were prosecuted from 1988 to 1993, or anyone who had cases pending, were prosecuted. And certainly there was a lot of collateral consequences related to those charges because, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, in 1983, they started the Florida Sentencing Guidelines, and they abolished parole in the state of Florida. The Florida Sentencing Guidelines, the first iteration in 1983, had a huge problem where there was a disparate impact on people who were charged with possession or sale or delivery of crack cocaine compared to powder cocaine or other substances. And so they realized and actually revised the sentencing guidelines in 1994 statewide because of this high impact on crack cocaine users and abusers who were being sentenced to significant prison time as a result of the guidelines.
And the Florida Supreme Court, as you say, found that this was a due process violation, but they actually found that this constituted governmental misconduct. So It wasn't just a bad practice. They found that it was an illegal practice.
Absolutely. Yep. because it was so outrageous.
Yeah. And so those arrested in these stings, Mark Baughman, this was obviously happening at a local law enforcement agency in Broward County. You worked with the federal drug enforcement agency for many, many years. How unusual was the idea of this? I mean, as far as we know, this was the only law enforcement agency in Florida and possibly the nation that was manufacturing crack cocaine. But in your mind, where does that rank in terms of unusual and strange practices?
To manufacture it that is unusual. But I can tell you, I came on with DEA in 1987. So I was at the height of this between 87 and, say, 96. Yeah, every decade, there's a different drug that becomes the drug of choice. Crack cocaine happened to be that drug between the late 80s all the way almost through the 90s until methamphetamine became a big, highly abused drug. I can tell you that DEA participated in these undercover sting operations. We did. We went out with state and locals here, even locally here in Jacksonville back in the day. Didn't have to manufacture or create it. What we seized off the streets was used again and just recycled, and or because you could use a counterfeit substance that looked like crack cocaine, represent it, as crack cocaine and sell it back.
One thing that was interesting about this case was that they were saying in part the reason that they were doing this practice was it prevented them from having to verify that the drug was actually crack cocaine.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, as far as the sentencing guidelines go and federal guidelines, 5 grams or more back in 94 when the crime bill was passed, you got 5 years minimum mandatory if you possessed it. Well, actually, no one got arrested or prosecuted for possession, but they did for distribution. When you look back, and again, there were undercover sting operations where undercovers were selling it, but there were undercovers going out and buying it too. Just a different type of a situation was set up. And keep in mind that if arrests were down, especially with these sheriffs that get elected every 4 years. They want to show to the public that they're addressing it in some manner, so they jack the numbers up a little bit with these charges. And back then in the late 80s and 90s, I don't think you saw much pretrial intervention. You didn't see you didn't have at least here in Jacksonville, you didn't have the community control division where you put people get diverted into a drug program.
No drug court.
No drug court. If it was very minimal. So now we've advanced, all right, and law enforcement's advanced with that, I believe. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, these people they suffered felony convictions, so now they may not get a job. It's going to minimalize them because they're addicts mainly. It's funny we should say it was in the African American community where it was being distributed, but most of the violators we were arresting were Caucasians going down there and buying. And there was the crime that was resultant of that was coming out was people were getting robbed, there were shootings, there were all types of things that were going. So I think because it was epidemic proportion, we were doing everything in our power to address it any way we could. So no one looked at it and dismissed it at that time. They didn't care about the after effect of it. Law enforcement does their thing, they arrest people and they move on, right?
If you're just joining us, we are talking about a new effort to reverse crack cocaine convictions that date back decades. You can join the conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org, or you can reach out and tag us on social media. I want to take a call from Kevin in Ponte Vedra. Good morning, Kevin. Go ahead.
Hey, hello, Ann. Thanks for taking the call. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Ponte Vedra. In 1989, I was the lead felony prosecutor in Broward County in the 17th Circuit. And it's called Operation Cradle, and I prosecuted a ton of these cases. The thing was, as the gentleman just said, it was being distributed. The setup was in the black community behind Dillard High School. People are familiar with Fort Lauderdale. But it was mostly working class white people and black people who were being arrested for purchasing the cocaine. Purchasing it is also a second-degree felony. What really bothered me about the whole situation is that you could go to if people know Fort Lauderdale, you could go to the bars along the Intracoastal Waterway, like Shooters or Dirty Nellies or places like that, where the yachts would pull up. They could see all the, I don't know what we would call them now, the South Beach types up in Fort Lauderdale. They were literally snorting powder off the bar, and nobody did anything about that. And I also would add that the sheriff, Nick Navarro, was very, very flamboyant, media savvy, and he is the individual who brought us the TV show Cops. That was his idea, and he spoke to some people, and that's why we had Cops.
And Kevin, I want to ask, since you say you prosecuted hundreds of these cases, and evidently they on some level troubled you. I mean, I guess it's worth reminding that as a prosecutor, it's not like you've got a lot of volition. I mean, you are basically bringing the cases that you are bound by law to bring.
Correct. Especially in Broward County, and I had a 3-year contract, and I fulfilled my contract. But in Broward County, there were like 3 or 4 layers you had to go through if you wanted to even drop a case. And it was very, very difficult, and it was all about your numbers. It was all about getting convictions or going to jury trial. I had a standard plea bargain that I offered people. As I said, I was the lead felony prosecutor, which meant I ran my own division. I would offer, if it was the first-time offender, a withhold of adjudication and 2 years probation and a drug offender evaluation. Or if they had been convicted before, it would be an adjudication and 3 years probation. And everybody was fine with that. It was just a matter of the numbers. You could have a day of you go in court for your arraignments, and there would be 20 cases, and maybe 15 to 18 would be crack cocaine, and then the other cases would be home burglaries from people who were stealing because they were addicted to crack cocaine.
And so, Kevin, are you gratified to see this effort to go back into some of these old crack cocaine convictions and have them vacated?
I don't know if gratified would be the right word. I mean, these are cases we all went to work every day, and we knew we were going to be doing these cases. At a certain point, I kind of thought it was ridiculous. Let me choose my words carefully here. I know who the state attorney now is, Michael Satt, from 1976, and his last case was the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shootings. The individual that is in there now, there's a lot of politics going on there now. A lot of politics. And I'm sure there was a press release and a lot of look at me, look what I'm doing.
Well, Kevin, I wish we had a better connection because it's wonderful to hear your insights into those cases. And I would love to keep you on, but we do have kind of a digital problem there on the phone. Shannon, how surprising is it to hear this kind of take that Kevin presents as a former prosecutor of these very cases?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin's a great attorney. I know exactly who that was. And, he's got a lot of experience. And some of the prosecutors who are in Mr. Pryor's office right now,
that's the current prosecutor.
The current prosecutor's office are, saying they remember these cases and that, they remember at the time it not sitting right with them. There's law enforcement officers who have come forward. And Kevin's right. Immediate press release. This happened. From the time the press release was issued and them discovering that there was this issue in their archives was like days. So in the interviews that I've seen of Harold Pryor in the last week, it's been like, well, we haven't gone through all the files yet. This is new. This basically just happened. So certainly there's politics, but there will be collateral benefits for these individuals. One question for Kevin that I would have had is, how many of these people actually went to prison because of it, because of the guidelines, because of, prior existing records?
I do still have him on. I mean, like I said, Kevin, we're having connection problems, but did you hear Shannon's question?
Yes, I did. I don't know. Can you hear me? I'm on I-10 right now. But,
yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So the sentencing guidelines, completely different than they are now. If you were a first-time offender, it was anything from probation up to 2.5 years, up to 30 months in prison. And if you had been convicted previously, it was 3 years. It was 3 years in prison. But you had said something earlier about this was before Mr. Pryor's time. Honestly, this was 1988, 89. I don't think Harold was even born yet, to be quite frank with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been an attorney about 12 years now. He's probably about 36, 37 years old.
Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, I mean, certainly there are politics. There will be some good that comes out of this. But my fear is that people are in prison because of maybe not this charge, but the subsequent charges that they would have had if they were addicted to crack cocaine. And certainly, what we know so far coming out of the Broward County State Attorney's Office is that they had archives that they were going through. It was brought to his attention by the appellate attorneys in the office that this State versus Williams case did not apply retroactively to thousands of cases, and they feel that they can go through the cases. There's actually prosecutors who are volunteering their time to go through these files to track down these people, and that there are community-based providers who are going to help with things like clemency and trying to seal and expunge records in order to absolve them from any of the consequences of these arrests. So,
Mark, I want to ask you because this is an example of a different kind of disparity. We've talked before, and I think it's pretty well known that there were sentencing disparities when it came to crack versus powder cocaine. And there have been efforts just in recent years to undo that disparity. I think just as recently as 2022, interestingly, overturned under the Biden administration, but it was Senator Joe Biden who basically introduced and saw the passage of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which established that disparity between crack and powder cocaine.
So in the state system, on a sentencing guideline, you probably get about 154 days gain time a year on a sentence. In the federal system, you do 85% of your time on a first-time offender. You only get 54 days gain time a year. So imagine that in the sentencing guidelines getting caught. Even distributors, even people selling crack federally back in the 90s, early 90s and 80s, they're still sitting in prison if they're doing a 360-month sentence, all right, because of that disparity on the guideline, because of that 50-to-1 ratio crack versus powder, and or now it's ice because they've just shifted to methamphetamine, pure ice, and they do the measure and the quantification of what the percentage of ice is. Now, granted, we do have a drug problem. There's no doubt about it. It changes every day with designer drugs, with every drug changes. Every drug becomes more popular depending on who's using it and what cross-section of people are using it. But I can tell you, most DEA agents and even narcotics detectives will tell you, if they've been on any time at all, we're not arresting our way out of this. We're never going to arrest our way out of it. There's got to be something. And there's a big measure of this. Is this a social or criminal problem? Are we doing this? And how the prosecutors view it now, I think it's great we have PTI for these people that are addicts. I mean, you have
PTI.
Pretrial intervention. So you have people sitting in jail. Probably half the people sitting over in Duval County Jail are addicts. Mm-hmm. And they're committing crimes related to their addiction. They're not being sentenced for that. They're being sentenced for breaking into cars, from stealing stuff out of houses, to prostituting themselves, you name it. But it boils down to addiction primarily.
Or mental health.
Or mental health.
Or both.
Or both. But even the mental health aspect of it, people get more help on the mental health side than they do on the addiction side. Trust me, I can tell you that. There's more avenues for them to get care than there is. You have two centers here. You have Gateway and River Region. Other than that, you got to pay a lot of money to go into a rehab.
And the disparity that we're talking about in sentencing, Shannon, I mean, it basically meant that they were targeting for the crack portion of their prosecutions users, and in the powder realm, pretty much people who were providers or sellers, just because you had to have such a greater quantity to be penalized at the level that a user was.
So
in crack cocaine.
What we're talking about is like there's a charge, right? Sale or delivery of cocaine. And when you get to the point at which you are being sentenced, we have what are called guidelines, and it's this handbook where it started in 1983, and it would break down, how you classify this charge, if there's enhancements, if there's aggravating factors, if there's mitigating factors, and what the score is for that guideline. And it's very complicated, and as a criminal defense attorney, that's something that we have to learn and we have to become very familiar with. And so it goes down to what even the charge is, like what you actually plead to is very important. And so when we talk about crack versus powder cocaine, especially in the 80s and 90s, and in fairness, I am also an 80s baby. So like I wasn't actually around when all this was happening, but we're seeing the fixes that are being put into our system right now to not have that distinction in order to remedy what's happened for the last 40 years, 35 years. And when we're going through those guideline scores, previously the change in a cocaine derivative versus powder cocaine was actually acknowledged and given an aggravating factor. And so it increased the sentence that someone would get because of the type of cocaine or the type of drug it was. And they've done this with different types of drugs, right? The quantity of drugs, there's fines that might be attached to the quantity of drugs. It might be a trafficking amount, etc. And so the entire process of prosecuting drugs, drug offenders, drug users, drug dealers has gone through so much change and so many iterations in criminal justice. And they're constantly trying to figure out the best way with, drug court, pretrial intervention. Do we address the symptom of drugs in our community? Do we go after the drug dealers? But the disparities that we were seeing in the 80s were directly related to this war on crime, this war on drugs, where if you were doing crack cocaine, if you were a low income, person of color who's addicted to crack cocaine, you were a much worse offender than, like Kevin was talking about, the people in South Beach who were doing lines of coke off the bar.
One thing that was,
Can I add one
yeah,
thing
please.
to that? The good thing also is that judges, even on a federal, I think on the state level too, on the guidelines, they can depart from those guidelines. The judges can look at it and go, I'm not doing that.
Right.
I'm not giving them 10 years. I'm not giving them 15 years. I'm looking at this person in totality and saying, this individual is living on the street or living hand to mouth. They have an addiction problem. I'm going to depart from that. And that's a good thing. Judges need to do that. That's their job, by the way. They should do that.
I want to ask you, though, Mark, because one thing that offended the Supreme Court here was not just the manufacturer of cocaine. It was the fact that the law enforcement officials deliberately sold it within 1,000 feet of a school. It increased the penalties that the people who were buying the drug faced. But as the justices noted in their final order, they were also creating an unsafe and really kind of despicable situation for a school where, an already afflicted community where they're actually creating a drug market in order to do these busts.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like doing these. I'll be honest with you. I thought that it would be borderline or it was entrapment, a lot of it. I mean, I can remember hearing the undercovers and the conversation. No different than when you send an undercover out on some of these highways here locally in Jacksonville, females for solicitation cases. It's similar. I'm not saying it's right. A lot of, or wrong. I mean, you're talking about crime blighted areas, right? It's how you have to address this, right? Like I had a responsibility one time with JSO to clean up Springfield. Well, I can tell you, Springfield's still not cleaned up. Okay, but I had that responsibility, and we had a weed and seed initiative program, and we were supposed to go out and, all of a sudden you miraculously make a change there, and it just takes a period of time, but you have to do it the right way. We have to go after the highest violator, the people that are actually distributing the drugs, and not the addicts. The addicts, it's not working. So, yeah, these issues of drawing them near a school or drawing them near a church or whatever, and making sure the judges see that, by the way. Prosecutors know it too. So I think they've gotten away from that a little bit on those things. It's a slippery slope. You go down one way or the other.
And it still happens. I mean, there's still buy busts and not local law enforcement making crack cocaine or, whatever. But there are still situations where someone is purchasing within 1,000 feet and it happens to be an undercover officer. And now they've added not just schools, but churches and convenience stores. So the legislature has changed to include those locations as well. But, that does enhance your penalty from a 15-year penalty to now a 30-year penalty in a first-degree felony. And that greatly enhances the sentencing situation. So we do still see things like that happening. And whether it's manufactured in the sense that you are going to these places to intentionally lure people to that place and create more crime in those locations versus that is already where the crime is taking place. I don't know the answer to that. But certainly, if you do enough criminal defense locally, you do see a lot of these charges with the enhancement.
Yeah, and I got to say, at least from the people that are buying it, that's ridiculous. Now, the people that are selling it, I have no mercy on them. I mean, I'll be honest with you. They've trashed and ruined people's lives, and they care nothing about it, and they're making money off of it. And if we don't see it out on the street corners as much anymore because the drug trade has changed. I'm holding up a cell phone right now, right? No one can see me on the radio, but this is how people deal drugs now. It's almost like Grubhub or a delivery service. You don't have to be on the street corner anymore. And now it's more fatal than ever because fentanyl is just about in every substance out there. People may think they're buying Xanax or Soma or whatever it may be that they think they're Xanax or Oxy. Now the game's even higher, right? So on the selling end of it, I have no mercy. I'm never going to change off of that. But I can tell you on the buying end with people that are buying, it's just ridiculous to incarcerate people with that period of time.
Well, what about the retroactivity of this? I mean, you were saying, Shannon, the Florida Supreme Court decided this was illegal, what this Broward County Sheriff's Office was doing, but they didn't make it retroactive, which is kind of stunning. If they say it was actually outrageous conduct and a deprivation of due process and illegal, and it wasn't retroactive. But I'm just wondering, more recently, the changes to the sentencing that erased that disparity between crack and powder cocaine, also not retroactive.
Right. And this is one of the toughest things in our jurisprudence, where there'll be an effort to change the law through Supreme Court case law, but it is not necessarily retroactive. And the flip side is true. People will, want things to be retroactive. That would be very bad for everyone. So this is just part of appellate law. I'm not an appellate attorney. I'm sure someone else could speak more eloquently on it, but it is one of the issues. And so the prosecutor in a county, the elected state attorney in a county, as the highest law enforcement official in that county, is the one who's going to be able to do the work to ensure that there's integrity in that conviction and that they have the absolute power to undo the mistakes of prior administration. We talked about politics. This was a big issue that came up when Melissa Nelson took over for Angela Corey. She ran against Angela Corey's policies locally, and our local prosecutor, for anyone who's not clear. And there were things that she has the power to undo, but she has not undone them because she doesn't want to create a precedence of constantly undoing the prior administration's
Such
work.
as, can you think of an example?
Well, one example is we have an integrity unit now. I think Shelley Thibodeau is still the attorney who's in charge of it. And we recently saw, or not recently, a couple of years ago, we saw two people who were, they were acquitted, set aside their sentences. They had served 40 years in prison. That was a huge story locally, nationally, in criminal defense especially. And so that was actually Harry Shorstein's administration, I believe. And I believe Hank Cox was the attorney who had prosecuted that case. So it was many, many years ago. And so that was one example where our local state attorney's office has an integrity unit.
I think that was an Angela Corey case, if I'm not mistaken.
No, because it was like 42 years previously. But in that situation, we know that there are attorneys in our local prosecutor's office who are working on making sure that there's integrity in convictions, and they actually will hear from inmates and they will look at their cases, and they're very selective in which cases they take action on. And they've spoken about this pretty publicly. Similarly, Harold Pryor is, he is making political choices where he's going to do something that happened in the 80s rather than, 2008 or 2018.
Much easier to do that.
Yeah, it's a little bit easier from a political standpoint. It's going to have a really positive impact, hopefully, on a lot of people. I mean, if these people are even living, this is a long time ago, and these were addicts.
The other part of that is you're going to if you seal these, it still pops up. I know I look at FCIC and NCIC print, it still pops up as sealed.
Yeah.
So people are going to ask the question. They're going to know something. I'm in favor of expungement, just getting it off the record so it doesn't show up for these people.
And they've talked about the fact that they're probably not eligible for sealing and expunging their record based on these particular charges, but they're going to help them get clemency if they're entitled to it. But the reality of the situation is if you're an addict in South Florida in 1988 to 1990, you probably have a lot more charges on your record. There's very few people who are going to be like a one-off crack buy and then nothing else.
This is true.
So unfortunately, I think the effort is well settled. I mean, they're doing it for the right reasons, hopefully. But it is a statement to say the court could not make the change retroactively, so we are going to make the change retroactively. It's just unfortunate that another administration, it took from 1993 to now, and another administration to make that choice. But this is why when we elect prosecutors, we need to make sure that they are committed to the integrity of their convictions, whether, it's from a prior administration where there was a clear issue with the convictions that were happening, or in their own administrations. If they make a mistake, they need to be willing and able to correct those mistakes because people's lives are affected.
And I think law enforcement has corrected it on their end. I've heard a few, you have 67 sheriffs in the state of Florida, and you have a lot of municipalities and police chiefs, and they will tell you, I'm not going to do this and make people guilty of something. We have enough crime as it is. We don't need to be doing this to add to it.
Right, because prosecutors, all of our state attorneys have the ability to choose what they charge and who they charge. They do not have to prosecute anyone. They can make the choice to not prosecute someone. And that is in itself a political choice and controversial. But sometimes, especially in the case of children, they can choose not to prosecute maybe a very young child who committed all the elements of a crime, but they choose not to prosecute someone for a reason like that.
Well, keep in mind, most prosecutors have if it gets filed and it starts getting pursued, they have a zero defect mentality. They're going for the batting average. So they're wanting that conviction no matter what. So am I right, Shannon?
And that's a problem. I mean,
it's a big problem.
I think there's prosecutors who are like that, but there needs to be prosecutors who can take a step back and say what we thought was true. I mean, this was poignant just the other day with the whole Duke lacrosse team coming out that the offender actually admitted that, or the accuser actually finally admitted that she had lied. And Mike Nifong was not only removed as prosecutor, but disbarred because he was so adamant that incident had happened and he was just wrong. And he couldn't take a step back and see the forest for the trees. And so that's what we expect in our prosecutors to be able to, in the midst of a prosecution, if they get Brady evidence, if they get information where, maybe this isn't accurate, that they're able to take a step back, look at what's really happening and make good choices about whether or not they're going to proceed. And I think the time has changed. Times have changed.
Although you mentioned the Conviction Integrity Review Unit that we have here in the Fourth Circuit, which is Clay, Duval, and Nassau, but it's one of just 4 in the state. One of them being in Broward County, one being in Hillsborough, and then one being in the Orange Osceola County District. But that leaves a lot of counties out in terms of having a prosecutor in place that is even thinking about these things.
Again, it comes down to the voters. It comes down to the community demanding that their prosecutor set up a conviction integrity unit because, they brought in a seasoned criminal defense attorney to look at prior convictions and see if there was a problem and really
You mean here in Duval?
Here in Duval County.
With Shelley Thibodeau.
Correct.
Yeah.
And, and it takes someone who's willing to ask really hard questions and to, look back at what happened previously. And a lot of what a prosecutor does is completely contingent on the then existing status quo of a community. What does the community want? What do the people of the state of Florida want at that time? And, what we want in the 80s, the 90s, the early 2000s, and now is completely different, right? We just saw a vote on legalizing marijuana. And I think, 57% of Floridians are probably ready to stop prosecuting people for minor possession of pot. It's just not something that the community really cares about anymore. But in the 80s, very different.
And I think on that integrity issue, at least the unit that does that, a number of these, it's not whether a person is guilty of it or not, because by and large they may be, but it's a procedural violation, especially because they have ineffective counsel sometimes that doesn't do what they should be doing on their end. Say you get these 2255 motions in federal court, and a lot of them, end up getting a lawyer. And obviously, African-American violators primarily get court-appointed representation. They don't get the best representation, right? Prosecutors know that, so they go for the juggler on these type of cases and they're going to get them to plead to things that necessarily they, shouldn't be pleading to. But they have no choice. They're locked in. I think I'm right about that.
Well, I think you are right about what was happening. But I will tell you, especially in Duval County, our prosecution office is so diverse. Our judiciary is so much more diverse. Our public defender's office is excellent. I mean, these are some of the public defenders get such a bad rap because of, I think, bygone eras where people really did not get good counsel. But there are actually excellent attorneys in public defender's offices across the state.
Sure, some of the best, really.
And one just became a judge. Yeah. So, certainly they are very good attorneys. And there was a time, I think, in Florida, but since I've been practicing since 2010, I have personally seen the shift in the integrity, with Brady lists being more public. There is an effort, and certainly there might be prosecutors who are doing that in some of these counties that don't commit to integrity in their prosecution. But I do see a possibility where we will have all 67 counties in an area, in a space where the prosecutors are truly committed to the integrity and prosecution. And I look forward to that day.
Well, we look forward to having our local prosecutor on. She's going to be on in early January. And so this is something we can talk with her about. But Mark Baughman, Shannon Schott, thank you so much for being on today and talking about this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Up next, we talk to the local director of a Florida horror story making its national film debut. Welcome back. Local filmmaker Warren Skeels is celebrating a major milestone as his new thriller hits theaters nationwide. Here to tell us about the thrill ride of making The Man in the White Van is director and co-author Warren Skeels. Good morning, Warren.
Good morning, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So this movie is inspired by the true story of a serial killer from Hernando County named Billy Mansfield. How did you first hear about this case, and what made you decide that you wanted to create a film around it?
So I actually had coffee with a surviving victim of Billy Mansfield Jr., and that was really kind of the catalyst for really engaging me and because I connected to the survivor's story, and I thought, there's so many stories about serial killers out there that are, glorifying the serial killer. It's about, their MO, or it's a detective or a journalist tracking down the serial killer. And what really struck me was that this was from her point of view, and I was hearing her story and her accounting of it. And that's what really just drew me in. And I thought it was a really unique perspective. It was an inspirational story of survival, having escaped a serial killer that she didn't know at the time was a serial killer. She found out about 5 years later when she was going to college and saw a headline in a newspaper and immediately saw him and said, that was the guy.
And this surviving victim that you met initially, is that the person that you've built the film, the central character around in this film?
Yeah, so the character is based on her. Annie Williams is the character in the film, and we took probably about 80% of her actual real life story as sort of the building blocks of the screenplay, and then there's another victim story that we pulled in for the end to really capture the entire storyline of the fictional Annie Williams in the movie.
And there are a number of people that didn't survive the serial killer. I mean, the family that he came from was a family of kind of serial killers and terrible offenders. But I'm interested in trying to tell the story from the perspective, as you say, because there has been this new discussion in the world of true crime about trying to be mindful of that, to not exploit somebody's terrible experience or a family's terrible experience. And so it's a little bit of a difficult needle to thread sometimes, is it not?
It is. I mean, certainly there is a thirst for it, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be just this mountain of material out there on Netflix and Hulu and Amazon. But I think there's another side to it all, and that's really what interested me in exploring the survivor and the victim side, as opposed to just sort of recanting what the serial killer did, so to speak.
Yeah. And so one of the things that's particularly shocking and scary about this story is the fact that no one believed this girl. I mean, she was sort of having this experience. Tell us. I mean, she was seeing somebody stalking her.
Yeah, so I mean, in real life, and this is kind of another component that really fascinated me in terms of trying to be authentic to her, the circumstances of 1975 in rural Florida, where her parents were a well-to-do, they were a well-to-do family, affluent in the area, and she admittedly was a teller of tall tales. She fibbed a lot, as she said. I thought that was cute. She didn't say she lied; she said she fibbed. And that just sort of set the stakes for her parents who never really knew, what was the truth and what wasn't the truth. And just the idea of something bad happening in their neck of the woods, so to speak, was just unfathomable. I mean, even the local, sheriff, the deputy at the time said that, their biggest concern was getting the town drunk home on a Friday night. So the idea of something darker, more nefarious, that was really left for, the big cities of New York and Chicago and southern rural Florida in 1975. It didn't even cross their minds that something as dark and horrible as a serial killer was really lurking in the woods.
It was a different time too. I mean, how do you portray that in your film, that a mindset that isn't perhaps as quick to jump to those sinister, conclusions than today?
Yeah, so I mean, working with Ali Larder and Sean Astin, who played the parents, that was actually something for all three of us, really sitting down and talking through and dialing in what was that mindset of a parent in the early mid 70s compared to being, a modern contemporary parent now, where we're just flooded with, mass media telling us that there is a danger around every corner. Our children are not safe anywhere. And it was completely different, back in the 70s where, there weren't missing persons on milk cartons. 911 really wasn't a national, didn't exist yet. It was before the internet, before social media. It really, truly was a time where ignorance was bliss.
And it's odd too, because I mean, we talk about stranger danger. It is so much less pronounced today than it was back in the 70s, where there really were sort of routine child kidnapping. It doesn't happen that much today. It's a pretty extraordinary event when it does.
True. And, another piece to all of this, when I started doing the research into, what she called the man in the white van, I really found that this was one of a pocket of major crimes that were associated with the buildup of the white van becoming a symbol of fear that is sort of a trope today, but they're, the real reasons why it became, such a symbol of fear. And between Dean Corell, the toolbox killer, and the inner workings of Billy Mansfield Jr., that's why we have that
Sure.
symbol right now.
I mean, one of the worst child crimes in Jacksonville, the murder of Cherish Periwinkle, was committed by a man in a white van. So, I mean, there is, um, I guess, some truth behind that trope. But I want to talk to you. I mean, this is a huge film for you. You've done a lot of work before. Most recently, you've been working on Siesta Key, which is this MTV reality show.
Very different world.
Yeah, I am curious about that. I mean, how does this compare? I guess the experience of having a film of this release, magnitude versus the TV stuff that you've done or the other films.
Yeah, I mean, working on Siesta Key was, I mean, as a director, it's great because it's really like, learning and crafting your chops and being able to work fast. And Gareth Paul Cox was a cinematographer and then became a director as well on Siesta Key. He's also a Jacksonville local man and talent who has been a longtime collaborator. So when the opportunity of making The Man, the White Van and turning it from a screenplay into a feature came about, I really tapped Gareth to come on board as a cinematographer because he is so talented. And we both initially, all of our training is really in scripted and narrative. So it was just a matter of translating all those skills over into, into the genre of a thriller, that's the genre I loved growing up, like Hitchcock and, Rear Window, Psycho, and Vertigo. I mean, those are the films that I grew up loving and wanting to tell those kind of stories.
We just got about a minute left, but it's Sharon Cobb's also the screenwriter on this, also from Jacksonville. It's a film set in Florida, and yet you had to film in Louisiana. And I guess I just like you to hear briefly on the issue of incentives.
Sure. Yeah. First off, Sharon Cobb is an incredible writer and an amazing collaborator. And also, I should mention that Scott Borland did the score for the film and composed.
Also local.
Also local. Did an incredible job. His versatility between being able to deal with the thriller themes, but then also the touching sister and romantic themes in there as well. Just really crafted a beautiful score. But as far as incentives go, I mean, that's really that's the big deal. Louisiana has them, Georgia has them, Florida does not have them, and
in this case, it made all the difference.
And in this case, it was really a difference between ultimately being able to tell a story and shoot it in Florida, or take it to a state that has incentives.
Well, Warren Skeels, congrats on the film. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Up next, the Jaguars suffer a disappointing loss after a costly interception.
The Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens in Jacksonville curated art from ancient times to the present. Explore galleries, enjoy refreshments and entrees at the cafe, and treasures in the museum shop. More at cummermuseum.org. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. When people are hurt through no fault of their own, finding the who, what, when, where, why, and how that led to the accident is critical to proving the truth.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com. Life South Community Blood Centers, providing blood and patient services to the local hospitals, serving patients in this community. Donating blood with Life South helps save lives. More at lifesouth.org to find a blood drive near you.
Did you know that less than half of American households give to charity? You can do better than that. Give to this station today. Thanks.
Please call 353-9528 or visit us at wjct.org/radio.
The New York City Police Department has a tool developed with Microsoft that utilizes the largest networks of cameras, license plate readers, and radiological sensors in the world. Nevertheless, the United Healthcare CEO's alleged killer wasn't arrested because of that mass surveillance network, but because of an observant McDonald's worker. American law enforcement and the limits of mass surveillance. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11, here on WJCT News 89.9.
The outgoing and incoming presidents have vastly different goals for the federal courts and who sits atop them. As President Biden races to get judges confirmed before the end of his term, a look back at how he changed the judiciary and what's in store for the courts during a second Trump presidency. The latest installment in our series, If You Can Keep It, next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it was a tough weekend for the Jaguars against the Jets. Here for a recap is News for Jack sportscaster Alessandra Pombrian. Happy Monday.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
Not far from a victory Monday.
I know, not like last Monday. But unfortunately the Jets won, or for Jaguars fans, unfortunately the Jets won 32-25. So now the Jaguars are 3-11.
And there was some hope that this would have been a better outcome just because the Jets were pretty bad too, right?
Yeah, they both were going into the game with 3-10, so obviously not great seasons. And the Jaguars, they had it until they didn't at the end of the fourth quarter. It's so funny because all season it's been the Jaguars are just sucked the first half and then most half of the second half. And then usually at the end in the fourth quarter, they're able to rally. But now it's like that's the complete opposite of yesterday's game. So it's like, oh my goodness, like what now?
So they had, they're not doing great, right? They're vying for worst in the NFL, but there was some bright spots yesterday in terms of a rookie record that was broken. Tell us a little bit about that. This is Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, so the first-round draft pick, Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU, he broke the rookie receiving yards record and the rookie receiving touchdowns record all on that first drive when he scored and they took the 7-0 lead. And I did a story on him last night, and I asked him a couple questions during the press conference, and he was like so excited. He knew he was going to be able to get the touchdowns, but he didn't know if he got to the receiving yards yet. So when he found out by the announcer saying it in the stadium, he said he was really excited. And then he handed the game ball to his mother. It was the first game ball that he's handed to his mom all season because he said he kept forgetting to do it. He would just go straight to the sideline and hand the ball off to the guys that hold the ball, I guess. But he finally remembered, and I got the video of him giving it to his mom, and his mom was so excited. She had the biggest smile on her face. So I was like, you know what? At the end of my story, I was like, maybe, unfortunately she didn't get any of the other game balls, but this was the most important one. It was her first one. So, you'll remember that forever as a family.
Sure. Record-breaking one. Is it tough for somebody who's like a first-round draft pick and a rookie like Brian to be on a team that's doing so poorly? It must just be kind of this mix of highs and lows.
Yeah, and he was actually asked that by Mike DeRocco from ESPN yesterday. You broke these two franchise records, but you guys didn't get the win. And he was like, replied and he said, yes, I'm excited that I broke those records, but at the end of the day, it's a team sport. You want to win. You were so close to winning, and then, obviously you didn't. So he said he'd be more excited if they won and he was able to celebrate those two records. But at the end of the day, he still is, proud and, excited to break those records. But I agree, you want to celebrate everything and as a full team. And unfortunately, they weren't really able to do that.
So some talent on the team that are the result of like their early picks. Now the Jaguars are headed into these last few games with an eye on who will get to draw first, right? Which is not anything anybody wants to race to the bottom for. It's funny how it's just kind of the opposite of relegation in soccer, where it's like if you lose, you go down here. If you lose, you get this great reward. How do they balance that?
I don't think the Jaguars don't need a quarterback. Obviously, they have Trevor Lawrence. Usually these teams that need a quarterback, they're going to, you don't want to say that they'll sacrifice their season, but that would be in the back of their head because, if you get the first round pick, if you get the first pick, you're going to get you could pick whoever you want, but usually you're going to go for a quarterback. The quarterbacks in this draft, they're pretty good. They've been better in years past, in my opinion, but they are pretty good. I think Cam Ward from Miami is really good. Shadir Sanders from Colorado is really good. And then Dylan Gabriel, who's a Heisman finalist with Cam Ward this past weekend. I think he'll be up there too, but the Jaguars don't need them. So if they get like the first overall pick, I would assume that they would trade with someone for either draft stock or, whatever, or compensation, and they'll move down just a little bit. But I mean, who knows? Who knows who will be picking, the first or the draft picks this season? If Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke are still here, everything is up in the air at this point. But I think the last 3 games, you've already beaten the Titans, you already beat the Colts, and you have the Raiders, who are actually worse than the Jaguars, in my opinion. So I think you could win out. Possibly you could get 3 more wins to finish the season. But who knows?
Yeah. And in terms of cleaning house, I mean, we've talked briefly about it. We now know that Bill Belichick has another job with the Tar Heels, so he's not in the running. But is there any more discussion, any open discussion that anyone's doing about replacing the coach, replacing Baalke?
It's so funny because
either or of them. I mean,
So it's so funny because after the Titans game, you don't really hear that anymore. After a win, those conversations, right? But now this week, of course, that will be brought up. No news has come out on if they're worried about keeping their jobs or if Shad Khan has made a decision. I would assume by the end of the season, there will be discussion on if they stay or not.
If they win these last few games, though, you think that could tip the ball back into their favor?
Yeah. I mean, you end the season on 3-game winning streak. That looks good at the moment. But if you look at the overall, I think they're 4-15 since last December. So you kind of have to look at the overall scale, not just the immediate 3-game win streak, if they're able to finish the season like that.
Well, Alessandro, I know you had a long weekend of sports watching, including down in Miami. So thanks so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for listening. If you have any feedback or suggestions, you can send either to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything today, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock.
Undetectable by using AI technology to identify signals in the human voice that indicate heart disease.